Alright, so welcome for another video, well, our second video. The first one, we were planning on doing this, and you probably noticed all this equipment still on the desk. But was the culprit. We had ordered a part and it came damaged. So what is this video about? We're going to be putting together a computer, right? I have Brandon here, aka DJ Linux. He loves Linux. We'll get to more on that in a second. But so we figured we have this new studio that we've put together in our new office to do more videos and some fun things coming down the road. But one thing we need is a computer to run our video editing software. And so we figured, well, why not shoot a quick video of putting a computer together? And we know some of our clients and maybe some viewers may want to just know what goes into a computer, right? And those of you who are technical, this may be boring for you, so you could hit next. But for any of you who maybe want to see how a computer gets put together, we figured, why not do this and have some fun? So yeah. With that said, let's just kind of dive over. Brandon, maybe talk to us about what's on the table here.
Sure. So here's our computer parts. Here's pretty much everything you need to put together your average computer. So here we've got a motherboard, and so it's going to be kind of like the base of operations where everything kind of connects and it will communicate with all the other devices and components. Very important part, as everything else here. Here we got our graphics card. So we went with the Radeon 580. So this is going to be kind of like the power of the computer, a lot of the computing, stuff like that, most of the rendering for when we do the videos. This is going to be the power supply. We've got 520 watts, so it's going to kind of power all the components. As you add components, you're going to need more and more power. One thing to note about the power supply, even though it says 520 watts, that's kind of the max, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that all the components are going to take 520 watts. So you always want to buy something that's got a little bit more headroom. So in case you do need that more power, you're going to add components down the line, more hard drives or whatever it may be. You want to get something that's efficient. There's also like gold plating and stuff like that. Won't get into that here, but just know it's not 520 watts all the time it's on. So it's just kind of buy for what you may need down the road. And these are going to probably take the most. So when you're looking at your power supply, look at the graphics card. What is that going to need to power on the computer? If you're going to be doing something real light, maybe don't need to spend too much on the power supply, but you're going to go heavy on the graphics card, maybe look at a little bit more. And
really, the power supplies are one of the least expensive parts, so it's kind of a place to make sure you put those extra $10, maybe $15 into it and get a little bit more than you think you'll need.
Exactly, and then that's the other thing too, is that your power supply is powering all of these parts, and maybe the processor is really expensive, the graphics card is really expensive, you don't want those to get damaged because the power supply faulted on you in some way. So maybe think about going ahead and spend a little bit extra on that power supply. Get that gold rating. Check it out. Read the reviews. Take a look at what's purchasing, because that's going to be between your components and the outside world of current going through the house or wherever this is plugged into. So it's a big deal that you might not want to overlook too much. Next on the list is we got the CPU. We went with the Ryzen AMD. Forget which one this one is exactly.
It's the 2700X, I believe.
Yep, 2700X, Ryzen 7. So, kind of the brains of the operation. It's going to be doing a lot of the computing and stuff like that in tandem with the GPU. And definitely want something a little bit more powerful. If you're doing things very graphically intensive, you might want to spend more money here on the graphics card. Maybe a little less on the CPU. If you're really on a budget, trying to figure out what's the best bang for your buck. Think of the necessity. What are you going to be doing with that computer? How are you going to be using it? And that'll kind of give you an idea. There's always a lot of online help, forums, build a PC, plenty of opportunities to go find help, people who know, build computers for friends, family, or themselves. And so they've got a bunch of different needs and use cases.
Of course, us. Right?
Yeah, we have a specific need for this computer to be streaming PC, or not streaming PC,
video editing
PC. So, but there are people who need just streaming, so that's the thing to keep in mind. Then we've got our fans here, Silent Wings 3, 120mm, and that's just kind of like the size on the case. So this case will have a whole bunch of places where you can put fans.
There's one already pre-built in, as you can see here.
Yeah, some cases will come with one that's already put in there, and it's got the cable, which will all plug into the motherboard. So that's what the millimeter, the mm there is, and so here you can see mm. Yeah, maybe not. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. But yeah, so you will go ahead and just find what size fits your case. And there are different size cases out there, so just another thing to look out for. Here we've got our RAM. So the RAM is going to be the random access memory, and that's kind of like when you're running processes or programs on your computer, a lot of times that program will need to do stuff with the files, right? It'll need to put some random thing in address, memory, whatever. Doesn't really matter, but if you can afford it, get more RAM. I would always recommend at least 8 gigs in any PC, whether that be something that you're trying to push to its limits or something you're kind of not even using all that much, because RAM will catch up to you pretty quickly.
So in this case, I believe we are doing 32, right? So 2 sticks of 16, yeah. So that should be plenty of juice there.
Should be.
Yeah. And one of the things I'll say that we run into a lot of our clients, hey, if you're out there and in the business world and you've got about 20 Chrome browsers or tabs open in your browser, you definitely want some good RAM.
Yeah,
it's typically it's very RAM hungry. So
it's a good thing you point that out, because when it comes to Chrome, some applications like Chrome will take more RAM than you would think. And when Chrome is something you're using on the daily for all the things that you need to do, if that is taking more and more RAM and you're stuck at 4 gigs at that less than recommended 8 that I'd say you should be at standard, then you're going to start struggling, you're going to have issues, and it could just be the RAM. And if your RAM is falling behind, then it might start having some issues with your other components, like your processor is trying to, send some stuff to RAM, and it can't because RAM's overloaded, and now your CPU is working harder than it should, and it just becomes a mess. It goes downhill fast. So try to get more RAM. And the good thing about RAM too is it's modular, right? You've got 2 sticks here. Our motherboard, when we go into it further in the video, there's going to be some slots. They call DIMM slots. You can add more RAM later, so it's not really an issue if you can't afford it now. Just keep in mind where you're at and how much you're using. And then I think, what do we got here?
Well, we've got something. This is pretty cool. I mean, for us, this is we like what's in this box. So here we got some M.2 500 gigabyte solid state drive.
Yeah.
So we went with 2 different types of drives. Obviously, this solid state drive technology, the M.2, is a little bit on the higher price side, right? So, we went 500 gigs, which is still plenty to be installing all the operating systems we want, the applications we want. But it's going to be doing the heavy lifting, right? So we should get a really fast, responsive type of PC without breaking the bank too much, because this type of storage is, again, on the more expensive side, but way better performance than what you would have in a traditional type hard drive, right?
Pretty much. Cost per gigabyte is definitely going to be more, but worth it.
Right. And then in here, we'll take it out a little bit later, but it's just a really Western Digital 4 terabyte hard drive, so a lot more storage.
Way more.
But it's your typical slower traditional hard drive. So this is going to be used in this particular instance to be storing our files, pictures, videos, and this is really going to be the storage used for active storage, right? Applications, operating systems.
Right. Things that are going to be accessing that storage to get a file, read a file, write a file. It's happening a lot. That's going to be very common amongst the, whatever video editing software that we will go with, because it's going to need to read that file, write to that file, read that file, write to that file, and it's constantly doing that. If you're not on this, right, that's solid state. There's no moving parts. This is what that means. It's going to go a lot slower. You're going to notice that. Something like a lot of people like to call this spinning rust, right? Even if it's a new hard drive, and that's because there's that moving part. You have a platter moving, and it's just because of that extra overhead that the hard drive needs to do. You're going to notice that. You're going to feel that when you're using the computer. So invest in something that you're going to be using a lot. Put it on here, and then things that are storage, you want to just save the file when it's done. Then you can put it over here. The file's done. You pull it later, and then you'll read it later. You'll write to it later, but nowhere near as frequently as things that are on here.
Right. And I mean, again, just a little note for those of you, clients of ours. We deal with tons of different businesses, and they're contacting us. Maybe they want a new computer or a new laptop for an employee,
right?
Replacing. Always try to spring for the model that's got the solid state drive in it, right?
Definitely.
We see the solid state drives. These are the M.2, but typically, like most Dell, HP computers nowadays, you can get a 256 gig solid state drive built into the computer for roughly the same you would get for maybe a 500 gig traditional hard drive. And I always recommend going for that. Nowadays, we don't need as much storage locally on the PC. Is not as important. In this particular case, a little different. We're doing video editing. We're going to have some large files. But for your everyday, I would say this is one of the areas, between RAM and your solid state drives. If you can get that in your computer, you're going to be already ahead of the game.
Yep, exactly. And they're going to last longer, to be honest, too. A lot of times that you're going to see that hard drive just kind of go out on you, and you're wondering what's going on, and you got to buy another hard drive. Just get the solid state now, save some money later.
Okay, so we've gone through our fun part, the geek part, going over the components, but let's get to the fun part. Let's start building this thing.
Let's start building it.
All right.
I'm ready. So most people will have their different ways of doing this. Personally, the way I like to do it is I like to put the processor in the motherboard. So there's going to be a socket, and when you're buying, you should hopefully have checked your socket type matches the one that is compatible on the motherboard. So they'll have to go together. Normally, the motherboard will accept a couple different socket types, but they do change, especially as Intel and AMD come out with new, not new computers, but new processors. They'll usually change the socket types around a little bit. So just be mindful of that when you're purchasing.
And we've used a website. I think it's PC Part Picker.
Yeah.
We'll put a link in the description, but it's super useful. You can put your components in or even get ideas for builds, and it'll tell you the compatibility, which is really nice. It makes it easy.
Yeah.
So with that said, let's unbox our motherboard here.
Yeah, go for it.
And at the same token, we can, right after that, we can unbox.
I'll crank this open.
Here we go.
All right, so he's unboxed the motherboard. I've unboxed the CPU. I'll just kind of put that out of the way. So for the CPU, two things came out of the box for me. It's going to be a fan plus heatsink, so that's in this box. I'll just take this plastic piece off, pull this out. And so here we can see I've got a power adapter type thing here, and then I've got another power adapter as well here. So this is how we'll be able to power this from the power supply. That's the one. I knew that one on the top of tip of my tongue. And then here we've got our fan, and there's a heatsink. Underneath here, sometimes the processor will come. Sometimes it'll come with the fan and the heatsink. Sometimes the Intels, I've noticed that they don't come with this at all. You buy your own. You could do liquid cooling, or you could buy it with the air. And so this one's going to be air. It's got the fan. Liquid cooling is pretty cool. They come with closed loops, they call them. So it sounds kind of like complicated and scary. Like I've never done liquid cooling before. It's actually not too bad. It's pretty much the same process as this one if you do the closed loop. Also, the fancier, more complicated ones, if you do the custom loops, but that's for another video. For now, we've got a heatsink that's got thermal paste pre-applied to it. So that's what you see on the bottom. It's a nice coat. So manufacturers will typically do that, or they'll come with thermal paste, where it's like a little tube you kind of squeeze, kind of like toothpaste, onto the platform. So I'll just kind of keep that secure for now while we go through the rest.
That thermal paste pretty much makes sure you have a complete contact to your CPU, so that heat can go right through directly, right?
Right. So it could transfer, so that the fan will pull in the air. It'll go through the heatsink, and heatsink will suck up the heat and it'll push out from the fan, and then usually that will be going in front of the exhaust of the desktop or the case, so it pushes out the back. And there's a lot of debate over airflow, whether it should be like up and out, or you pick your own airflow. You research.
Make sure you're flowing. Right?
Make sure the fans are spinning and you're getting the heat out. How you do that is entirely up to you, and sometimes that even depends on where the PC's at as well. So just keep that in mind. And then of course we have our processor. So simple little tiny square that will drop in the motherboard. So with that out of the way, let's go over the motherboard. So here's our motherboard, and most times, well, all times, it'll come with this ESD plastic, so electric static discharge plastic, or I should say anti-electric static. When it comes to dealing with these components, everyone will always say, and us included, is to ground yourself. Now we have ground ourselves, and you don't see like any wrist straps, but
touch metal.
Yeah, it's good practice. I mean, it's going to be kind of a rare occurrence if you actually did touch it, and then there was a static discharge that would damage the components, but we're just going to keep going. So I'll go ahead and open this. The tape lets me.
So again, make sure you're grounded, both physically and mentally too. Just be prepared for this as you enter this process.
Also, I'm touching metal below the table as well. So this is our our motherboard, and on our motherboard we have a few different components here. I can kind of take you to the board real quick. So here's where we have our I/Os. So your ins and outs, your basically where you plug in your keyboard, your mouse, any kind of USB devices you might have. Onboard graphics. So this one has HDMI and DisplayPort here as well. Now, most times, especially when it comes to gaming, even though this is a gaming motherboard, we have a graphics card. So when you have that graphics card plug in, and that will plug in right here, it's going to take precedence over the onboard graphics. So you're not going to be plugging in that HDMI DisplayPort unless you needed to because you didn't have the graphics card, you repurposed the motherboard, what have you. But in our case, we will be plugging in the graphics card and we won't be using those IOs for getting displays. But everything else, like the gigabit Ethernet, the USB ports, the sound, you'll notice too this whole kind of chunk here, that's probably going to be the sound card for this motherboard. And then there's even a Type-C and some other little doodads, so quite cool. And like I said before, these are your PCIe, so this is where you plug in your graphics cards. These are the DIMM slots that I mentioned earlier for the RAM. So there's the 4. So on this particular board, we have 4 DIMM slots. Some come with 8, some come with 4. That's where we can, buy what we can for RAM now, and then down the road, if we want to, we could double the RAM if we need it.
So so in this particular case, we're going to consume 2 slots, 16 each, have a 32 gig machine, but if we want, we can go to 64, by adding just 2 more of the same.
Yep.
That'd be good.
Yep, and then you don't really need to do much about that. Like, there's these little clips, and then you just kind of pop it in. It's a pretty easy install, so it's just a matter of, you get the funds later, you know that you want to upgrade, buy the sticks, drop them in, and it's pretty cool. And then once you boot back up, it should notice the new RAM pretty instantly, without much effort from you. Here we've got our SATA ports. So SATA ports is where we're going to be plugging in hard drives. So if you do need space, you can get some. It's much like the RAM. If you need to get space later, you can add that by just buying another hard drive and plugging it into this port here. So we'll do that for R2 drives, or rather R1, because one of our drives is M.2,
right?
Which is going to be awesome, and that's new. Where is the M.2 on this? Oh, here it is. There's a shield. So this is the M.2 shield. Most of them will come with a shield in place. You just unscrew it, and then you just put the M.2 slot in there. It's that easy. These are pretty easy now, actually. They've gotten a long way from where you used to have to build them to now. So that's the motherboard. Oh, I guess I'll take over. So these talk about some of the power as well. So this is going to be your motherboard power. This is where we'll take our power supply. It's going to be a pretty big cable. We'll plug that in. That powers the board completely. We're going to have some power for the CPU, which is usually around the CPU. I'll find that later when we start installing that. And then here is some more power for, not too sure. Oh, this will be the CPU. This one's a little bit farther away than I would have imagined, but that one is the CPU power. So there you go.
Okay. Obviously, our CPU will be laying, so.
Yep, so we'll go ahead and drop the CPU in first. So I'll go ahead and open this box.
Let's move this out of the way so we can get a good shot of this.
No problem. Alright. And 7. Okay. Yeah. Oh, there's a thing over this. Like a bird.
Ooh, we should have. We'll use this computer to edit in sound effects.
Oh! So
there's a little light shining up above us.
So here's the processor. Just put the processor down. I'll try to open up the.
So yeah, I don't know if you can see. We got a little monitor here, but there's a little tiny arm. Will eventually be equipped with overhead cameras, but if you can see it in the shot, there's a little arm that lifts up, and you'll put your processor in and then lock that back down to keep it in place.
Exactly. Sometimes, too, when you're lifting the arm from the processor socket on the motherboard, there's a little plate, like a little plastic plate that's kind of a protector to keep that clean or whatever when it's in production or shipping and all that good stuff. So when you come out, don't just try to drop it in. Look for that plate. In our case, we didn't have a plate. We just had a little arm and then the socket's exposed, so we can drop in our processor now. The other thing about dropping in the processor is you'll notice that there's like a little triangle on the edge of your processor. And there's going to be a similar triangle on the edge of the square in the socket on the motherboard. The idea is that you just want to find the triangles.
You can't see it there, but it's here. He's telling the truth.
So you want to line up that triangle with the triangle on your processor so that you know that you're plugging it in the correct direction.
We'll drop in.
All
I don't know if you could hear that, but boom, it clicked right in.
We're going to drop our arm. And then I'll lock our processor into place. And then that's it.
That's it. She's not going anywhere.
Not going anywhere. So with that out of the way, we'll put this back in its box.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll just put it in the box, and I'll be the trash collector and narrator.
Not even. I'll close that later. All right. So now we've got to just mount our heatsink and fan on top of the processor. Now a lot of the times, I'm not familiar with this one quite. There's going to be a way to mount it in the back. It looks like this one's got like a little doodad here on the side. So we'll go ahead and trigger that. What's up with that? I'm probably going to be having some emptiness here. I don't know how they do this one.
So it looks like that goes right onto these clips, right?
Oh, yep. Oh, they've got like clips on this one.
So
okay.
A little different. You got to figure out, your motherboard, and this is going to be a little bit different. But if you can see here, let me lift this up just a tad bit. We've got these two clips or brackets that look like they're going to mount right onto that metal piece right there, which will hold it in place.
Okay, so this is the part that you want to do, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, shaky hands. Let's go.
We're dropping in. You can also use a crane for this if you need. When all else fails, when all else fails, sometimes you got to open up the user manuals, we saw, because this one's a little different.
No, I got that first try. I know what you're talking about.
Oh,
there was no
first try with the magic of editing from this machine. Let me turn that around and see if we can at least point this out. But each fan and each, I guess, heatsink's gonna be a little bit different. Here we had a little lever that you had to finagle on there and then flip the lever back. Really? It was in the manual.
Yeah. So what we did is I looked at the manual for the heatsink, and any heatsink that you buy, whether it be solo, like individual heatsink, whether it be fan, or it be liquid cooling, or if it comes with the processor, it'd probably be best to double check the manual that I didn't need because I did that first try, no problem.
I mean, who needs a manual?
Yeah, I know how all of the heatsinks will get mounted onto the motherboard, and that's
even
actually
future ones that are manufactured.
Exactly. But yeah, double check on how to mount it. A lot of times there's brackets in the back, sometimes there's posts, and also double check if you're running Intel or AMD because motherboards will be able to handle and be capable of using both processors, but it'll be different ways to mount the heatsink. Yep.
Perfect. All right, let's go to the next step.
All right.
Okay, so next step now is putting the motherboard CPU cooling combo, and we're going to mount that into our case here. So we're just going to mount it. I'm not going to kill you to death or bore you to death while we're doing it, but since we don't have an overhead cam, I just want to show you the inside of our case here. And essentially, we'll lie this flat, position it correctly, drop it in, put in our mounting screws, and then we'll get to the next step, right?
Yep, exactly. So in most cases, there's going to be tiny little standoffs that are usually like gold or yellowish, and those will line up with the motherboard. It has these going to be individual holes around the side and a couple throughout the middle. Number one thing to do is really just line up those I/O ports that I mentioned before. So my I/O ports are right here, so the I/O ports are on the back there. So when I drop it in the case, I'm going to line all those things up. Once I've got it lined up, I'm going to push the I/O ports through the back, and there's usually an I/O. You'll notice that this is just kind of like a rectangular cutout here, but there's going to be an I/O shield, right? That's going to go around everything, so stuff doesn't get inside and looks kind of neat. So once I push it in, I should start seeing those holes align, and then I'll start screwing things to mount and make sure everything is safe and snug on the board.
All right, well, let's mount it, and we'll show you what it looks like when it's all done.
Awesome.
So now we pretty much got the backbone, if you will, loaded into this chassis.
Yep.
And we're ready to start plugging in components, right?
Definitely.
And then on this particular case, if we flip it around the back, we're looking at this. We've got our trays for the hard drive.
Right, exactly.
And you've already got that hard drive in the tray, right?
Yeah, so I took out one of the caddies, and in most caddies, there's going to be, most caddies are toolless. What that means is there's little like plastic bumps that come out. On the side of the hard drives, you're going to have 3 screw slots, and it will probably be 2 and 2. And you usually they're pretty flexible, the plastic here, and you kind of just snap in, and you can just snap into the actual chassis itself.
Okay. So we slid the hard drive in.
Yep.
Little magic of editing, but there's our hard drive in there. Spinning hard drive, I guess we'll call it. So now what's the next step, Brian? What would you like to attack?
So pretty much at this point, we've got, like I said, the way I like to do it is got your motherboard and CPU. As you can probably imagine, having it mounted, trying to plug in a CPU and all that other good stuff, probably be a little bit more difficult. That's kind of why I like to do the CPU and the motherboard together first.
That was a good tip. I like that. Just slide it all
Yeah,
in.
combo it in, and there you go. Everything else is pretty much modular, especially with kind of how things are structured nowadays with manufacturers and how putting PCs and parts together are. Especially with things like this awesome M.2. I'll just drop it in my hand. It's like a stick of gum. It's pretty fantastic, actually. I don't know if that's going to focus, but, you know, pretty tiny. This is actually our hard drive. You saw the hard drive earlier. This is pretty much the equivalent of that. It's just faster. No cables required. As you can see, it's really can't even plug a cable into this thing. On the edge here, there's like some teeth. Basically, what we're going to do is that's going to slide into the motherboard directly. So that's going to really increase our performance in terms of how much data we can push and pull from this little guy here. As you can imagine, like we said earlier, this is 500 gigs. So like $1 per gigabyte is going to be significant compared to the spinning Rust, right? The older kind of what we're coming from, the hard drive, the platter with the disk and the ARM that's all magnetized and blah blah blah.
This guy that's in here.
Exactly, and it's kind of a space saver too, and it keeps things kind of tidy. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna drop the PC down right now.
Let's go ahead and do that gently.
Yeah, or just bam.
Yeah, I'm trying to drop it.
So now I've got the PC down. There's that plate that I kind of mentioned earlier. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna take that plate out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the M.2 slot, hard drive, or however you want to pronounce it, and we're going to, it's kind of awkward the way these work, but don't be afraid. It kind of comes in at an angle. You plug that in at an angle at the motherboard, and then it just kind of pushes down. It's kind of a spring-loaded little device that way it makes it easier to plug it in instead of just coming out like flat with the motherboard and trying to slide it in that way. And then the shield will drop down over it, and then we're going to move our screw with the length of how far this M.2 drive will actually reach. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now.
We will get above camera
at some point
soon. So we apologize in this particular video, but
so we've got our main drive. So we've just installed the M.2 drive, and that's all snug on the motherboard. We've got our hard drive snug in the chassis of the case itself in its little hiding spot back here. And now we're going to go ahead and move that out of the way.
You want to go for the graphics card?
I forgot we had a graphics card.
Well, we have a graphics card. Let's not forget about it.
I forgot the graphics
card. I just thought maybe it's time for us to talk about graphics cards.
Now, I actually recommend that at a later time, to be honest with you.
Let's do it later then. Let's do it later.
Let me tell you why I would recommend the graphics card at a later time. Graphics card, especially more of the kind of cards that you see today, they're going to be like bricks that you're going to be dropping in the PC, and that's going to be laid out like almost always because of the way the form factor of pretty much all your cases are going to be. It's going to be right in the middle of all of your stuff. So when you drop that graphics card in, you're actually not going to be able to get to something sometimes. Like for instance, our M.2 slot is right next to the PCIe.
Underneath the graphics card. So put all your small components first.
Exactly.
Graphics cards
big
later.
Stuff later. Yep. Okay. So and that's just to kind of make it a little bit easier for yourself, right? I mean, it's not really that big a deal to put the graphics card in, depending on how some things are set up for the motherboard. Like in this case, the M.2 would have been kind of a struggle. For us, it was pretty much a breeze, but that card coming in, you're going to realize pretty soon that you're going to have to take that card back out and put it back in later. Right. That probably is not the case for the rest of it, but even then, I still just like to kind of go with that kind of order of operations. Again, it's up to you the way you want to do it, whatever works best. And so that's just kind of my 2 cents on the graphics card coming in last. So let's just go ahead and knock out some easy stuff, like the RAM. So RAM is pretty simple, pretty much like the M.2 slot, where we just kind of slide it in and then just screw it and fasten it, however it's going to be done. Same thing for the RAM. RAM, the way we kind of tell the way to plug it into the slots is there's this little indent here on the teeth. And hopefully you can kind of see that indent there. So that indent will tell you if you pretty much got it in left or right, which way it's going to go in. So I'll go ahead and snap that in first. Other thing to note, remember how earlier we looked at the graphics or the motherboard and there was 4 DIMM slots. Well, I've got 2 channels of RAM. So what slots do I go in? You might just pick any 2 slots and think that's fine. You probably wouldn't be wrong, to be honest. It'd still work. You might even actually see the 32 gigs of RAM. But the way you should be doing it, and if you're not sure, read the manual that comes with the motherboard. It'll tell you all the information on how to do the processor, how to do the RAM, how to do your graphics card, how to do the M.2. All those instructions should be in your manual, including the RAM. what you're looking for in terms of the RAM for how to install on the motherboard is not really which way in the teeth and all that. What you're looking for is the DIMM slots. If I have 4 and I have 2 sticks here, we want to do dual channel. That's what we're going to be doing in this configuration. Dual channel, you'll have basically DIMM 1 and then DIMM 3, or A and B. So A and B are connected 1 and 2, but here's the catch. They're not actually side by side, pretty much ever. I don't think I've ever seen them side by side. So you'd have to look at the motherboard's manual to verify which one is what. And you can always look on the motherboard itself. So I'm going to do that now. So I can see here I've got DIMM A1 and then DIMM A2. Then I've got DIMM B1 and DIMM B2. And then I can even see here, there's a little bracket on our particular motherboard that says first. And it has first labeled for DIMM A2 and DIMM B2. Meaning those would be going in first. If I had just 2 of our channels, which is what I have, I don't have all 4. And all 4 would be pretty obvious, just plug in all 4 and you're good to go. But in this case, I would want to be following the bracket. And actually, you know what? I'm going to verify that with the manual here. So I'll go ahead and do that now.
And I guess that's a good, basic question to ask since you're on that topic. Sometimes we get asked this question. Hey, let's say I have a 4 gig stick in a slot. Can I just add 2 more gigs? The best recommendation is to have those 2 sticks be identical, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah,
always
want to mix and match.
Yeah, never mix and match RAM as much as you possibly can, if ever.
Should go in there, okay? There we go.
Yeah, and then I hear the snap, so I know that the RAM has been fastened inside there. And I'll just do the same exact thing with my other stick of RAM.
Listen for the click.
Yep.
Hopefully not the snap of the breaking RAM, but a good click. Seated is a good sign.
Exactly.
Oh, that's a good sign right there.
Right there.
Okay.
So RAM is as easy as drop it in, snap, snap. We're secured and we're good to go. Now, so we've got our RAM installed, CPU installed, fan installed, hard drive installed, other hard drive, solid state installed. What's left?
Well, we got fans, we've got graphics card.
Got fans, we got graphics cards.
And of course, last but not least, we need to power it all up, so our power supply.
Power supply, exactly. So, I think with everything on the board, we're pretty much good to go and put that
graphics, that bad boy. That's
the
fun part.
The fun one, yeah.
All right.
So let's grab that.
Here you go.
Thank you, sir.
All right. So for all intents and purposes, for this PC that we're building, all components obviously are needed, right? They got to work together. But this is really going to be the heart of what we're going to be using for in terms of video editing and rendering videos together, just like what you're watching. This is doing a lot of the heavy lifting in video software type programming. So
there's a ton of plastic on this, so I'm gonna go ahead and peel that off for safety reasons.
Probably a good basic tip, right? Take off all the plastic.
Yeah, I'd recommend that greatly. So go ahead and take this off. Nice wrapping though. I do appreciate it. So throw that off to the side. I'll grab that later. I'm gonna take off the plastic on the back. Okay, and then there's a little kind of protective sleeve here for where the pins go into the motherboard as well. Also nice.
Now, on the back here, we're going to have to be taking out one of these slots, right?
Right. So you'll notice here that we've got 2 little teeth-like things here. What's going to happen is these pins are going to drop when we drop the the graphics card into the motherboard. These pins will go into our PCIe. These 2 teeth are going to kind of go around snug on the side of the motherboard, and it's going to drop alongside the case there. So by default, we have one slot kind of open. It might be a little difficult to see here.
Lift and take a look at it.
So there's our opening. So we've got one slot here, but we've got 2 teeth here. So we're going to have to peel off the other slot there. It may seem like you're breaking your case. Don't worry, you're not breaking the case. It's intended. You'll notice actually that the metal is significantly softer on those little rims here. So I'll go ahead and I snap it off, and I'm just gonna kind of peel it, and I'll move it back and forth until we finally get it to come off.
I guess like The closest you can compare it to is maybe the top of a soda can.
Yeah, exactly, like the top of a soda can. That's actually perfect. Yep.
So, question for you, Brandon: what do you do with this piece of metal?
Souvenir.
Souvenir. You collect them, hang them up on the wall. There's a PC build.
Yeah, you kind of do what people probably have with like their little necklace with all their soda cans. Yeah. You know, do the same thing with your all your builds, so you can cherish them. Right, so now I've got my 2 slots open, and we'll go ahead and drop this in. Nothing too crazy about this as well. Pretty much like the RAM, just bigger. We're going to drop it in. There's going to be a little plastic lever that's going to kind of snap it into place, and that's going to hold it down to the motherboard. If I ever need it, just kind of push it back and then lift it. Same thing for the RAM. Like I said, just bigger. So I'm going to line these up. So now we can get to our screws here. Yeah, and that's nice and flush. So we should be good. Alright, so we've got our graphics card flawlessly in there without any issues whatsoever. Now it's time to move on to the power supply. So this case is a little bit unique. Just like the hard drive, it kind of hides everything here, which I do appreciate that because it really helped with the cable management. You can even see they've got some cables back there ready to go for us so we can plug in pretty much the ports and stuff like the USB, the power button, and all the LEDs on the front of the box. So we'll be plugging those in later when we do the power, when we start plugging in the power. But we're going to go ahead and slide in this little power supply here. We've already got our hard drive there ready to go. After that, we'll start cabling it up, maybe throw in our fans, cable those up as well, and see if we can get a post going after we install Windows and things like that.
Nice. Alright, well, with the magic of editing, we sped some things up because we didn't want this to be a 2-hour video. But we got through some cable management.
Yeah.
Learned, right? But we got everything working, functioning pretty much on the first try. We got lucky. I mean, there wasn't really many gotchas. We had to unplug and replug a couple SATA cables for the 4 terabyte hard drive, but got it up, booted it to a flash drive with Windows 10, got that installed. That's what you see here. But everything seems to be running pretty well so far. So that was it. I mean, any final tips and thoughts?
I guess to say when we put in the hard drive for the 4 terabyte, it will ask you to when you're setting it up, if you want GPT, go with the GPT. If you
with the GPT.
If you have more than, I think it was like 2 terabytes, it won't recognize more than that. So if you have a 4 terabyte drive and you want to use all 4 terabytes, go ahead and go use that GPT option and you'll be able to use all 4 terabytes.
Yep. But thanks for sticking with us. Thanks for watching. Again, just a real simple PC build, right? Kind of hopefully you've learned what parts of the PC do what, and that it's really not that scary. If you have any interest at all, look at some of the links in the description.
Yeah.
Go build your own PC, learn what it's all about. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you at the next video.
Appreciate it. Bye.